Okay, friends, shalom from Jerusalem, and it's wonderful to be together again. We right now have the good number of 50 online, and it's a true honor and pleasure, truly both, to be with David Saperstein on this webinar sponsored by Hiddush, Rabbis and Kenters for Religious Freedom and Equality in Israel, JPLAN, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network, JLJ, the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists, and Hiddush. And what we have come together to discuss today is the new Israeli coalition, Deathblow to Pluralism or Opportunity for Change. Actually, until yesterday, the title was the Emerging New Israeli Coalition, but as of yesterday, it's a reality. And this reality is going to be challenging. It's going to be challenging within Israel, and it's going to be challenging for world Jewry and especially American Jewry. So we'll start with a sort of an initial presentation that I will make using some PowerPoint slides, hopefully getting some of the key relevant elements across. It's unfinished business. I'm still writing some of it, and I'll be sending the PowerPoint presentation along with whatever additional materials we will develop on this topic to everybody who registered for this webinar. And following my initial presentation, Rabbi David Saperstein will be providing his perspective. And frankly, I'm as eager to hear David as you are, because in a number of key areas relevant to our discussion, especially with regard to American Jewry and the comparative perspective of some of the legal constitutional issues, David is a tremendous resource, tremendous expert. And as I said, I'm as eager to hear him as I'm sure all of you are. So let's start with just presenting what has now happened in terms of the new coalition. So Israel went through 3 election campaigns over the course of the last year plus, from April 2019, September 2019, and then March 2020. All 3 elections resulted with a slightly different number scheme, but the key political issue was one and the same. Namely, neither Likud nor Kahol Lavan, blue and white, neither Netanyahu nor Gantz were able to form a coalition. Namely, have at least 61 out of the 120 members support it and endorse its government. The kingmaker, as it was perceived for these 3 campaigns until recently, was Avigdor Lieberman, the leader of the Russian Olim Party, Yisrael Beitenu, who held sort of the swing vote, except he denied it of Netanyahu, he denied it of the Likud, with the claim being very much so that he will support automatically, without question, a civil coalition consisting of Likud and Kahol Lavan, but he would not support a government which is based on the ultra-Orthodox parties. As he said, a Jewish state, yes, but a Torah state, a theocracy, no way. The religious freedom element was a key building block in Lieberman's campaign from the almost the outset, namely as soon as the results of the first April 2019 elections were known, and it was the pillar of his campaign and the reason why he picked up from his initial 5 seats in April of 2019 to 8 in September of 2019, and was able to maintain a larger number, though not 8, but 7, in March of 2020. So here is the coalition. The coalition theoretically consists of 73 out of the 120, and it is the result. Sorry, whoever is speaking, can you mute yourself? Okay. The coalition of 73 consists of, on the one hand, the Likud bloc. Well, I'll mute everybody again, and David, please release yourself when you are ready to speak. Unmute yourself. Okay. So the Likud bloc, which consists of the Likud itself, 36, plus the first defector from Labor, Gesher Meretz, was the one Gesher Knesset member, Orly Levy Abexis. And the last defector was Rabbi Rafi Peretz, who defected from Yamina. And he heads Habayit Yehudi, the Jewish Home, formerly the National Religious Party. The key element in the Likud's bloc are the two ultra-Orthodox parties, Shas and United Torah Judaism. Except that did not suffice for a majority of 61 that's essential as a key, as a precondition to forming the coalition. Netanyahu was able to break apart blue and white and gain the support of some, specifically 15 led by Gantz and Ashkenazi, and then Labor, at least 2 of the 3 Labor members, and for effectiveness we divided it here because Labor has Amir Peretz and Itzik Shmuli and Merav Michaeli, except Merav Michaeli said, I'm going to oppose this coalition and oppose its policies in any way possible, but I'm not resigning. And therefore, we counted 2 in...
I'm sorry, what?
Sorry, someone is still not muted. We counted 2 as part of the coalition, and we counted 1 as part of the opposition. And Derech Eretz, the 2 Knesset members who were part of Blue and White, who first announced that they would not be allowing Blue and White to present a minority government based on the support of the joint party, which is predominantly Arab. And they, or their refusal to support Blue and White and go into the possibility of a minority government supported on the outside by the joint list, and therefore having a majority over the Likud bloc, facilitated the unanticipated, and it was really a surprise to many and a tremendous disappointment to many who voted Blue and White, many who voted Labor, many who voted Orly Levy Abexis, but it materialized, and yesterday the new government was presented. You may have read it all, there's nothing new here, but it's important to see the numbers and to see who is in the opposition, who is in the coalition. But here we come closer to our issues. We need to understand that the challenge in Israel, that especially the challenge that many of us face, namely Israel's leaning to the right, whereas American Jewry is still predominantly liberal and on the left of center. And at the same time, the clash and the friction over issues of religion and state, they stem from a different set of breakdowns. When you ask yourself, who are Israeli Jews politically, what you need to recognize is most of them, huge majority, are on the right of center. I'm giving you one result of a survey here, but it's comparable to every other survey that's done by others. This was done by us, and as you know, Hiddush regularly monitors and polls public opinion in Israel. So this is from the 2019 Israel Religion and State Index. So according to this, some 64% of adult Israeli Jews identify themselves as being right of center, with only 16% identifying themselves as being left of center. If you don't understand that, you do not understand the nature of Israeli politics in recent years. And the reality is, in as much as many may bemoan over this, the hopes of labor, the hopes of supportive groups in America to see labor rise and resume its dominance, its leadership as was in the early decades of the state, is just not anchored in any real numbers. Politically, most Israeli Jews are on the right of center.
I'm just not sure why the microphone isn't working. That's all.
Most adult Israeli Jews are on the right of center and not on the...
About a half hour.
I ask whoever is speaking, please mute yourself, because muting all doesn't seem to do the trick. Whoever is speaking, mute yourself. All right, back to the topic. So the reason is quite obvious. It's not because people were necessarily born or the DNA is right, though many are, but because many Israelis have concerns over issues of security, and that brings them to favor the political right over the political left. That's not our topic. On the other hand, when you look at attitudes towards religious issues, when you look at Jewish identity, what you face is sort of the reverse. Whereas approximately 2/3 are politically on the right, religiously, about 2/3 are secular or what's labeled as traditional, not so religious, which is a label created by the Central Bureau of Statistics, who on most issues of public policy share the views of the secular. So you have approximately 65% who are secular or on the side of secular in terms of Jewish religious identity, and you have a minority of 21% who are either ultra-Orthodox or Zionist Orthodox, or what's called in Israel, Datiim. Now, if we want to understand the intersection of these two, here is the breakdown of political views based on religious identity. And here is what is one of the key conflicts within Israeli society. Ultra-Orthodox and Zionist Orthodox are predominantly right-wing politically. As you can see, 88.9% and 83.7%. Now, this is not our study. This was just recently done by the Israel Democracy Institute that published a monthly...
Ori, can I interrupt for a minute here?
Sure.
You have slides that you are showing right now?
Yes.
Are people seeing them? Could people just shake their head or nod their head? You are?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm not, but go ahead. Go ahead. Just go ahead then, so long as the others are.
Okay. So this is the Israel Voice Index, which is a new monthly poll published by the Israel Democracy Institute. And what you see here is that whereas the majority of secular Israeli Jews are either left of center or center, the overwhelming majority of Orthodox Jews are right-wing. And this too needs to be factored in if you want to understand the interfacing of religion and politics in Israel. Now we come to the coalition. As I said, there were tremendous hopes and interest among Israelis in seeing a new kind of a coalition, a new kind of a government that's going to be advancing religious freedom and equality. After so many years, with very few exceptions, that the coalition was pushing religious coercion and discrimination. Blue and white platform, and I'll gladly send you more, but you can just see the sort of the spirit here. So blue and white platform says the status quo, that's the way that euphemistically the relationship of religion and state in Israel has been labeled from the early days of the state. The status quo has become a sign of stagnation, and today it sometimes even harms the individual freedom of some Israeli citizens and harms the status of Judaism in the country. Blue and white will preserve the Jewish identity of the state alongside the realization of the right of every person and community to shape their way of life and freedom and in freedom and tolerance. And it goes on. So basically, blue and white was declaring on a number of key issues, such as marriage, such as gender equality, such as LGBTQ, such as public transportation on Shabbat, such as the Kotel controversy. It was declaring that it will move away from the status quo, it will move away from the religious coercion, and it will introduce a new sense of freedom and equality. It went as far as, you can see this in the September 2019 elections, huge billboards all over the country. You see Gantz's face, and the text in Hebrew is, only a large blue and white will establish a secular unity government. That was quite extreme, and a few days later they really retracted and were explaining away they didn't mean secular, they don't exclude ultra-Orthodox, etc., etc. But basically they understood that their voters were looking for a message of religious freedom, and indeed 90% of their voters, as you will see, wanted a civil unity government without the ultra-Orthodox, or one that doesn't depend on the ultra-Orthodox. So we have been looking at my request is once again, whoever is not muted, please mute yourself. We've been checking over the last few years repeatedly a particular a configuration of the question of what kind of government do Israelis want. We asked it in different ways, but the result was the same. It really wasn't the way we asked the question, it was really the essence of it. Namely, if you had two options, which one would you want? Would you want a coalition, a narrow coalition as it usually was, that consists of the ultra-Orthodox parties and preserves the status quo on religious affairs? We wanted to be very careful, and we called it status quo. We did not call it religious coercion. Or do you want to see a broad civil unity coalition consisting of primarily Likud and blue and white? And what you see consistently is that the majority indeed wants that kind of a coalition. I'm sorry that I have to ask again. This is someone. Okay. So consistently, about 2/3 say we want a broad civil unity coalition with the Likud and blue and white. And the reason why this was feasible, and the reason why blue and white attracted so many votes, is first and foremost because it isn't left. Now, Netanyahu may have labeled them left. The slogans were Bibi, a strong right, a Gantz, a weak left. And basically they called everybody that wasn't the Likud and wasn't in Netanyahu's camp left. They called Victor Lieberman left. But people didn't buy it because most of the supporters of blue and white were center and right of center and not left. And it didn't pursue and didn't promise and won't pursue left-wing policies or what's associated with left-wing politics on security and international affairs. So as you can see consistently, March 2019, April 2019, December 2019, February 2020, 2/3 want a civil, broad unity coalition rather than the kind of coalition that has governed Israel for most years and is to some degree the current coalition as well. So just to further look at what is behind those numbers, so if you look at the religious identity of those who are responding, you will see that 82% of secular Israelis, and you saw before that secular Israelis make up about 50%, and together with the traditional not so religious, about 65%. So 82% of secular Israelis, 76% of traditional not so religious. The clear majority of Israelis want a civil unity, broad coalition. You look at the voters of the specific parties and you see 90% of blue and white voters, 94% of Israel Beitenu voters, 71% of Labour Gesher voters, even 51% of Likud voters. So that basically tells you a story, and we are now moving on. We are moving on to understand why is there such strong resentment of the ultra-Orthodox as calling the shots in general and calling the shots on Jewish affairs in particular. So here are two sample cover pages of two key newspapers. One is Yediot Achronot, the popular sort of secular daily, general daily, and one is Yated Ne'eman, the ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi daily that is the official organ of Moshe Gafni's, Rabbi Moshe Gafni's party, namely the Yeshiva Ashkenazi world. Both papers are on the eve of Yom HaAtzmaut. Yediot Achronot's cover page is an example of all the general press, all the general media in Israel. They all celebrated Yom HaAtzmaut. It was both a celebration and all the symbolism. You look at Yated Ne'eman, there is nothing symbolically signifying that this is Independence Day. This is a celebration. Nor is there a text. The headlines have to do with the pandemic. The headlines has to do with the fact that the yeshivas are closed. And the headlines are also another one having to do with the yeshivas. So to understand, and we don't have time to go in depth into it, but to understand what the issue here is, so here is another article from Yated Ne'eman on May 1st, leading to Yom HaAtzmaut. The title is very symbolic. 72 years, it's the 72nd anniversary of Israel, 72 years for the Co-op board, in Hebrew, Vaad Habayit. And this is just a paragraph. We do not recognize the spirit and vision of the state, quote unquote. Our collaboration with the government, with its duties and budgets, is nothing more than participating in a co-op board. There is a body here that technically manages the business. Through a give and take relationship, we pay the co-op maintenance fees and low maintenance fees, one should comment for a variety of reasons. And under its auspices, we consume multiple budgets. That's why the greatest rabbis of our generation saw and still see it necessary to send representatives on our behalf to the co-op board to take care of our needs, so that this board, in whom our trust is not so will not deprive us of our needs. But not even for a moment do we share in the values of the state with its symbols and general culture, and we do everything to separate ourselves from it. Now you need to understand, Yated Ne'eman is not a normal paper in which you provide exposure to multiple views. There is what they call Va'ada Ruchanit, a spiritual committee that censors everything that is published. This is published as the official line of the party of United Torah Judaism, comparable approach by the Sephardic ultra-Orthodox, and their representatives are now the Minister of Housing, Rabbi Litzman, and the powerful chair of the Knesset Finance Committee, who basically has his hand on what we call in Israel the shalter, the faucet. Now, you don't have to take my word for it. Just last month, JPPI, the Jewish People's Policy Institute, sponsored by the Jewish Agency, co-chaired by Stu Eisenstadt and David, Dennis Ross. So Stu Eisenstadt and Dennis Ross are the two co-chairs of the JPPI. They publish an annual pluralism index. And one of the questions they ask is, how do you Jews, relate to the contribution of different groups within Israeli society to the success of Israel? So this is the perceived ranking from 1 to 4. At the top of the list, soldiers. Second, secular Jews. Third, Druze. Interestingly, diaspora Jews are pretty high, 3.4. Who is at the bottom of the list? The Haredi. Lower than Muslim Arabs in terms of the perceived contribution to the state of Israel. And another question that was asked there, again, speaks for itself. How do you see the treatment of different groups by Israeli Jews? And as you can see, regarding the Haredi, most Israeli Jews feel that they are treated too good. And interestingly, again, for secular Jews, they have much more sympathy or empathy with Israeli Christians and with Israeli Muslims. They are not treated so well, and Israelis, secular Israelis, are aware of it. So for the average secular Israeli or the traditional not so religious, the Haredi community is treated too well by Israel. Of course, in the eyes of the Haredi, it's the mirror image, it's the opposite. They don't feel that they're treated well enough. Now, I'm rushing and we'll finish in 2.5 minutes. It's the specific issues that are part of the coalition agreement. There is one specific issue that's referred to in the coalition agreements. The coalition agreements between the Likud and Shas, the ultra-Orthodox Sephardi, the Likud and United Torah Judaism, the ultra-Orthodox Ashkenazi, and the Likud and the Gesher and Rabbi Peretz. It refers to a commitment to pass a draft bill that's going to, in essence, allow all yeshiva students to be exempted from military service or civil service if they only want to. Namely, no one yeshiva student would be forced to either serve in the IDF or in the civil service. This is the complete antithesis of how Israeli Jews in general view it. Only 20% buy into that element which the Likud agreed in the coalition agreements to commit to with all its immediate partners. And I'll speak about blue and white in a minute. So only 20% accept the rhetoric of the ultra-Orthodox saying Torah is their craft, Torah Omnuto, and therefore they should be exempted, with 80% saying they should either serve like everybody else, or at least there should be a quota set, and the others should be either serving in the IDF or in civil service. Okay, quickly, equal recognition for the three major Jewish streams. 64% support equal rights for Reform and Conservative equal to Orthodoxy. Attitudes toward conversion, only 38% feel that conversion should be, in order to be recognized by the State of Israel, done in an Orthodox fashion. The majority feel that any conversion by any stream is sufficient. Or for that matter, patrilineal descent. One parent is Jewish, that's enough. Or in self-identification. And of course, there is a difference between the way secular Israeli Jews view it and others. When you look at marriage, a recognition of all forms of marriage, reform, conservative, civil. At the last time we checked, 70% of the adult Jewish population in Israel supports it. Okay, I'll skip the issue of the court. Maybe we'll get to it, and I'll get to the last point. And the last point is, so what about diaspora Jewry? Because a number of studies in recent years have shown that Israelis are ambivalent about should the government be taking into consideration or should be shaping Israeli policies according to the views of diaspora Jewry. And what we see here is that when we ask the question the way we ask it, namely, do you support or oppose engagement, involvement, direct involvement of diaspora Jewry in partnership with Israeli activists and organizations, in advancing religious freedom, such as freedom of marriage and doing away with the monopoly of the chief rabbinate? What you see is consistently, and we did that survey a number of times, consistently 2/3 saying, bring it on, come on board, we need you, we want you. So that is a question that I'll be posing to David in 1 second. But before I do that, of course, the things that I skipped and the other question that I will be asking David to comment on is the following. In the coalition agreements with the ultra-Orthodox parties, there is one more important element, and that is that the Likud commits not only to preserve the status quo on religious affairs, but also to mend any violations of the status quo wherever those violations may come from. Now, of course, this is clean language referring to if the Supreme Court dare, or other courts, dare rule on many pending issues, Kotel, who is a Jew, the issue of draft, the issue of conversion, the issue of conversion, the issue of public transportation on Shabbat, or other issues. If he does rule in favor of freedom, pluralism, choice, the Likud commits to change the law and pass what is called Piskat Hitgabrut, override clause, so as to muzzle the Supreme Court or muzzle the relevant courts and neutralize their ability to rule and have and give effect to their legal rulings. And this is the interesting end. That's in all the coalition agreements that the Likud made, with one exception. Not in the coalition agreement with Blue and White. There is no commitment to the status quo. Moreover, the coalition agreement with Blue and White, and mind you, the coalition agreement with Blue and White was done on the eve of Yom HaShoah, on April 20th. The further coalition agreements by the Likud were done on mostly May 13th. The agreement with Blue and White is based on the notion of parity. Yes, Blue and White is small compared to the Likud because Netanyahu was effectively able to tear them apart, but the only condition not the only, but the main condition they set for joining him was parity. And the parity includes explicitly in the coalition agreement that all policy decisions and all legislation requires the consent of both Netanyahu and Gantz, both the Likud and Blue and White. Namely, yes, the Likud has a status quo clause and a commitment to change the law with the ultra-Orthodox, but that will not supersede the right of Blue and White to cast a veto on any legislation that's aimed at castrating the Supreme Court and undoing its rulings, and in general, undermining the independent supreme judiciary of Israel's Bagatz of Israel's Supreme Court. So David, I'm turning this over to you. Any perspective on anything that I described? And especially, how do you see all of that playing out among American Jews? To what extent should they actually take the initiative, get involved, in what ways? And how do you feel about what is going to emerge as an ongoing threat to the independence and authority of the Supreme Court to cast judicial review?
Thank you, Uri, as always. Here, as I said, I think before, when we were talking before the presentation, there's not a single time I listen to you that I don't learn and come away with new insights, new information that Hiddush uniquely provides and that you uniquely analyze. So I'm deeply, deeply appreciative. Let me just, I want to have a chance to open this up to questions that people have. So let me just quickly go through a few points. And in the main, they're fairly obvious here. One, we're living at a time where there are growing strains between the diaspora community and Israel. It's indicated by the polls, it's indicated by experiential engagement that anyone who works in Jewish life outside of, certainly in North America, feels a little bit different in other areas of the world, as I've seen in my role, which I'm concluding this month as the president of the World Union. Uri was one of my distinguished predecessors in that regard. But certainly this is true in North America. And we know that there are three major ingredients to that alienation. One is the peace process issues, and obviously if this coalition, this is not the topic for today, but if this coalition ends up imposing some kind of annexation on the West Bank, it will have a further impact in terms of distancing large segments of North American Jewry from Israel. Secondly, the weakening of democratic structures that Uri has laid out, that I will come back to and talk about in a little more depth in a moment here. And the third is the status of non-Orthodox Jewry in Israel. The Jewry that comprises a significant, overwhelming percentage of the Jewry of North America. And if you look at a global level, then probably the majority of Jews in the world here. But in North America, the polls indicate anywhere from 11 to 14% of American Jewry is Orthodox, the rest are not. And so this feeling of simply the delegitimization of the kind of Judaism that North American Jews identify most with remains a recurring problem. So all of the things that Uri has talked about have an impact on the nature of diaspora Israel relations. It is particularly keenly felt in the younger generations today. That makes us worried about the future, which is why we put so much efforts into the youth work that we do outside of Israel, as you do in Israel, to try and find ways to strengthen the identity, why we promote all the options that people have to get to Israel, participate in programs, have a sense that they can contribute to the upbuilding of Israel. And to overwhelming numbers of North American Jews, there is this strong feeling that they absolutely do have a say, need to have a say in the quality of Jewish life in the Jewish state. The state was to be the ingathering of Jews, all Jews, here, and would be a Jewish state for all Jews here. And it's really one of the great ironies of all of Jewish history that today the only democracy in the world that has legal discrimination against the majority of Jews is the Jewish state of Israel. And we have to understand the impact that has for our efforts to build stronger ties between diaspora Jewry and Israel. There's a great deal of pride on the one hand in the growth of the non-Orthodox movements in Israel. The recent JPPI polling data indicates that the non-Orthodox streams today are as large as the Haredi streams, as Haredi Jews in Israel are. Here, we've doubled in the reform movement our size in the last 12 years. Here, there's a great deal of pride and identification that comes with that. But every effort not to give full rights to reform rabbis, to conservative rabbis, to give an option for people to live in accordance with their religious conscience in fulfilling whether they're secular or Jewish or non-Jewish, not to live with the ability to have participate in those aspects of life that have to be recognized by the state, marriage, divorce, burial, death, conversion, those issues in accordance with their religious conscience remains a countervailing force to the identification and pride that people have in what's happened in Israel generally and the growth of the non-Orthodox movements there. And we know this very keenly. If you look at the American Jewish Committee polls, that annual polls that happened, and contrast 2018 to 2019, in 2018, 70% of American Jews agreed that caring about Israel is a very important part of my being a Jew. That dropped to 62% the following year, with the percentage strongly disagreeing from 9% to 15%. Also, the percentage of US Jews considering a thriving state of Israel vital for the long-term future of the Jewish people dropped from 79% to 72%. The proportion expecting ties between US and Israeli Jews to weaken in the next 5 years rose from 15% to 24% here. So the polling data, the reality of what we face, all testify to this. And of course, Hiddush's finding of 64% of Israelis believing that we diaspora Jews have a right to have a voice in issues about religious status in Israel reflects that there is a potential to make progress on this given the right political configuration. But no one knows exactly how this particular government, this new government, is going to play out. First of all, the largest government in Israel is the 36 ministers in one form or another in this government. They are supposed to be an even split with Chokolavan and Likud here. You talked earlier, Ori, about in the platform, the broad statements, but let me just be clear what, and I think most of you know this, the platform itself was quite clear on the issues we care about of Chokolavan. Here on the issues of civil marriage, the issues of changes in the conversion system, opening up shops, operate on Shabbat, allowing cities to operate transportation, making modifications in the monopoly that the current authorities have on kashrut. Here, single-sex male couples, full surrogacy rights, prohibiting the exclusion of women from public spaces. All of these kinds of things that we have fought for here, we're part of that platform. And the interesting question will be with the likely control that they will have, they or labor, as part of the coalition agreements here in the culture ministry, the labor and social affairs, social service ministry, the economy and industry ministry, here, the justice ministry, the diaspora ministry, here. There's a potential for a lot of good things to happen, even without changing the status quo, before we get to the court. Here, there's a potential here that is going to be reflected by how assertive both the diaspora Jewish communities are and what kind of political drumbeat they can really develop in order to insist once and for all that the promises that have been made by the various parties over the year be fulfilled, and that Kahol Lavan live up to the promise that it indicated, not just by stopping bad things, but within the authority of those ministries to increase funding, to ease some of the restrictions, to make things easier. There's a potential for having an impact that is crucially important, and having the diaspora communities work with a large majority of people who want some of these changes in Israel, based on the polling data that Uri has provided so compellingly, both in this presentation and over the years. This is something of a significant effort for us to be involved with. I'm going to come back to it at the end here, but I really think exactly the values that Hiddush's vision statement have put before the world Jewish community are exactly the things we can mobilize that fight about. Here, I wish it would be read from every pulpit in the of every synagogue across the globe, to mobilize those of all streams of Judaism who share these kinds of views. Now, the danger is, of course, that the is already laid out in the ending of what he talked about, which would what happens here in terms of the independence of the court. And we all recognize why this is such an important issue. The United States and Israel are very different. In the United States, we have checks and balances that Israel does not have. We have a constitution. Israel does not have a constitution. We have a Bill of Rights that everything has to be measured by, that affects issues of fundamental dignity, fundamental freedom, fundamental rights that every human being has. Israel does not have an equivalent to that. We have a clear separation of powers. That's not the situation in Israel, where the executive branch and the legislative branch are really melded together here. We have a bicameral legislature, and one keeps a check on the other, and it leads towards moderation and balance here, representing varied interests here. There is no, it's a unicameral legislature that you have. So it is the court that remains a check that able to draw on the Declaration of Independence, able to draw on the basic laws, able to draw on some of the international treaties that Israel is part of, that has been a check in a system of checks and balances that is so essential to democratic strength of any country here. And of course, in the United States, Marbury versus Madison set up the Supreme Court to be the final arbiter of what was and was not constitutional. Under Barak, the growth in the 90s of the court's ability to use basic laws and the other sources I talked about to provide a similar check is indispensable to the democratic strength of the country. But this new government, depending on how it plays out, could do a lot of things that will be difficult to check. It can politicize the appointment of judges. It can change the process, as Justice Minister Ohana has called for, of politicizing the appointment of the legal advisors in the different ministries across the country. And it can, as we said, limit the scope of judicial review over decisions that is so important. So what happens with that is absolutely vital to us. Ohana said, in theory, there's no obligation to comply with court rulings. This is a time that we can't allow the democratic character of Israel to be changed. And Chokan Lavon is indispensable, as Uri called for, to be a check that is part of the agreement that brought them together here to ensure that this does not happen. Rosalie Arbella, the wonderful Canadian Supreme Court Justice, wrote about these issues. What is most alarming to me about this ongoing attempt to delegitimize the reputation of the judiciary is that it's being done in the name of patriotism. This, to me, seems somewhat perverse. Patriotism means upholding the values on which your country is based. Those values in Israel are Jewish, and democratic. They include respect for human rights, tolerance, equality, and dignity. That is what being patriotic means. Yet in championing those values, the Israeli judiciary finds itself demonized by some for being independent from political expedience and immune from political will. Independent judges who are not politically compliant are not anti-democratic. They are doing their job. And those critics, on the other hand, who think patriotism means doing only what politicians want, are the biggest threat to Israel's values. It's a good message for us today. And so I come back to the vision statement. Hiddush has played an essential role in setting forth for world Jewry all streams of what Israel must stand for at this particular time. And if we've ever needed to mobilize, to work together in stronger coalitions than ever, it's at this moment of history. So much depends upon it for our fundamental rights as Jews. So much depends upon this in terms of Israel's fundamental identity as a Jewish democratic state. And so much depends upon it in terms of keeping Klal Yisrael unified as one, and in Israel that lives up to the founding values of its Declaration of Independence will be the most important way to ensure that the Jewish people remain one in support of Israel. So Uri, let me with that open it up, how you want to proceed.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. You have certainly presented us with the tachlis. This isn't just about a theoretic examination, but about the question of whether there are practical lessons and practical missions that emanate from it that we may take and be guided by in the coming weeks, months, possibly years. So I was asked whether this is being recorded. Yes, it is being recorded, and you will all receive a link to the recording. 2, I was asked whether I could send the PowerPoint presentation. Yes, I will send it to everybody who registered. We had over 100 registrants, and we'll send it to all of you, those who were on this call and those who weren't able to join us, and we'll send some additional material on this topic as well. Now, we were asked a number of questions, and David, feel free to respond to any of them, and I'll let you have first dibs, and then if not, I'll refer to it. So bear in mind, don't answer it right now, but bear in mind, Peter Buxbaum, the chair of our Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network, asked, so is there a specific suggestion that you or we can make to Jewish lawyers who want to be helpful and supportive? So here are a few of the questions. Barbara Meltzer is asking, since Gantz broke his word to his voters that he would never join a government led by Netanyahu, why should we put any credence in his coalition agreement on religious questions? David, do you want to refer to it, or do you want me to go?
Here, I'll be glad to. I just simply had to change rooms while you were talking here because my computer was about to die and the power cord was in the other room. Wonders of modern technology. Here, you'd be better at this than I. I think that it is absolutely clear that that concern attends everyone who cares about their living up to this. One has to assume that to abandon that position that they've taken on such fundamental issues here would so alienate those who voted for Kahol Lavan that it would clearly be in their self-interest to hold the line on some of these core issues here. But you're right, Barbara, it is, we're just not certain here because so much that seemed to be bedrock has changed. But we can only hope that in this case, their self-interest or his self-interest will lead him to take a very strong position on it. But what's your take, Uri?
Okay, so just something of an additional layer. First of all, we don't have any assurances, but in many ways, this call and calls like it could help ensure that this is really what he does. Namely, you know, David urged American Jewry that has been more comfortable sitting on the fence than diving into the murky water. Too much is at stake here, and to the extent that there is an ongoing strong American Jewish voice that Gantz hears, and that Israel's diplomatic representatives who are now under Minister of Foreign Affairs Ashkenazi from Blue and White, Gantz's partner, are going to hear about your partnering with Israelis. You are being concerned about those issues. You're being concerned about these issues not just because it's a self-interest of liberal American Jews, but because you care passionately for the well-being and the strength of the democratic fiber and the inclusive Jewish character of Israel, which happens to coincide with Blue and White's own platform and own rhetoric over the time. So there are no assurances, but they can. And the fact that they can means that there is a good chance, knowing how much they have given up, how much they have sacrificed for this partnership, how much they have to go back on their promises, this may be their redeeming feature. This may be the silver lining. This may be the reincarnation of the Purim, you know, the Esther, scroll of Esther story, you know, Mordechai telling Esther, who knows if not for that purpose, you have been created and come to this point. So no assurances, but there is a lot that we can do if we want to do to keep Blue and White straight on those issues. Okay, another question. Why is it that despite the polls which show support for liberal principles, there remains such support for religious intolerance? Well, so again, we need to go back to this odd configuration. People vote first and foremost on security issues. 2/3 are on the right of center. They vote not because they support religious intolerance, they vote in spite of religious intolerance, and more occasionally, as we saw with Blue and White, as we saw with Avigdor Lieberman, do give greater weight to the issues of religion and state in deciding whom to cast their vote to. So the fact that Netanyahu is making that commitment to the ultra-Orthodox is because they have been his staunch supporters, his staunch partners. They haven't deviated to the left or to the right, and as you could see from the surveys, they are predominantly right-wing politically. There is this correlation between the political right and the religious right in Israel, and of course, you know better whether that correlation exists to the same degree in America. But it does in Israel. On the other hand, let there be no misunderstanding. Indeed, those polls show the mind and the mood and the desire of the public. It has almost played out this time, and it may play out even better the next time. We need to keep plowing. Certainly, if we don't plow, there is no reason to expect any further movement. But the tendencies and the feelings of the public are strongly felt and will be even more strongly felt because every issue from this upcoming attempt to legislate a new draft bill to the issue of, and David listed them, public transportation on Shabbat and gender equality, etc. All these issues are gut issues for the Israeli public. And the fact that the ultra-Orthodox are so much away from the mainstream of the Jewish population in Israel is catching up with them and going to ultimately bring about their political marginality, as we have seen between 2013 to 2015, and we'll see growing stronger and stronger. All right. Uh, Given the importance of the vision statement, how do we envision its introduction into Israeli discourse? Well, definitely, this is a ripe time to introduce it further to the Israeli discourse. And just another word, and when we email you, we'll also email you the vision statement for those who have not signed it yet. Michael Chernick chairs our Ruach Hiddush, Rabbis and Cantors for Religious Freedom in Israel. And it's unique, and it's significant, and it's really important, and one cannot over-exaggerate that. Michael Chernick, a graduate of, Yitzhak Elchanan of YU, a rabbinic school and a professor of Talmud, is a symbol of the fact that we have been able to assemble Orthodox, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, renewal, and their representatives are on this call. And there are many out there, hundreds of rabbis and some cantors, we are picking up cantors as we go along, are a part of this rabbinic and cantorial network. The vision statement was written by Rabbi Mark Angel, a leading modern Orthodox rabbi, and myself. It represents a unifying, bold, a change of paradigm. This isn't about handling this angle or that angle. It's an alternative paradigm for a true Jewish and democratic state. So yes, we'll be stepping up, spreading it in Israel, and I hope everybody here has signed it. If not, please sign it, share it with friends, share it with family, have your congregation sign it organizationally. It's of tremendous potential because it has zero financial cost and major potential impact, especially at this time when we need to bring across the message of a partnership between American Jewry and Israeli Jewry, world Jewry, on this critical issue. David, anything else on that question?
Again, I made the thing, I wish it would be read from every pulpit. It's really important for rabbis who are on this call, whatever stream they're from, to help educate their own congregations on this idea that we're not in it alone. Whatever we are, whether we're Reconstructionists or modern Orthodox or conservative or Reform, we're not in it alone. Here, these values transcend any stream here and really can be a unifying force in the Jewish community. So taking the responsibility to bring that message to our pulpits in Israel, to our pulpits in North America and across the globe is crucially important now. And this is really a time to do that. We're so divided in so many ways here. And, some of the IDI polling about the Supreme Court kind of reflects that here. If you're a liberal or centrist, you're strongly supportive of the court. If you're a conservative, you're very critical of the court. The kind of divisions we face in the United States today that plague so many countries across the globe, of growing divisions today, it imperils everything that each of our countries individually, and all of us with a kind of a global idea of democracy that is an essential characteristic of a stable world here, and of pursuing fundamental human rights. We need to affirm that. This vision statement here, communicated broadly to our communities, is one way of doing that within the Jewish context.
Thank you, David. And this is a segue to a question that was posted by our good friend, Rabbi Ira Yudavin. He says, a majority is useless if it's not mobilized. Who will organize the movement in North America?
I think my take may be a little bit different than my friend Ira's about how effective we have been in the Reform movement and the conservative movement about doing that. Here, the leadership of our movements in Israel and in the United States and in Canada have been working very closely together as a major priority on these issues. And the success of our campaign in the World Zionist Congress election is an example of our prioritizing this issue. And yet, we fail to have the impact that we need to have on the global scene or in Israel itself. And so our challenge is absolutely right. Who will do that, particularly at a time when, understandably, every one of our institutions, Iraq, IMPJ, Hiddush, IDI, every institution in Israel that cares deeply about these issues, every institution in the United States is under such enormous pressure because of the COVID-19 crisis. It's really hard to keep our eye on the necessity to build this kind of pressure when we're in survival mode, literal survival mode in some of these absolutely indispensable institutions to the well-being of the Jewish community. I don't have an easy answer to that. And it means that those who have the energy and those who have the time to do this really step up here. And that means each and every one of you and those in the communities who you know to be allies. And we'll work together on it. But let's not pretend that this isn't a unique moment in terms of the enormous challenges that the institutions that are the key institutions in these battles are facing, just in terms of their literal survival and core work.
Well, again, if I may add, Ira, you are right, and you have had your own, efforts at mobilizing the American Jewish community, and you know how challenging that has been. Now, there have been a few, some years ago, such as Ron Lauder, who surprised everybody with his strong op-ed in the New York Times that basically said, enough is enough. Charles Bronfman, and a few others. We need to go beyond the mentality of we and they, or us and them. We have this joint responsibility and joint effort, because if this, namely Israel's character as a Jewish and democratic state, namely inclusive of all Jews, namely freedom of religion, pluralism, diversity, gender equality, if that fails, we can basically say goodbye to the next generation. I don't know how many younger folks are on this call, but we can say goodbye to the next generation of American Jewish leadership, because their commitment will be running thinner and thinner to the point of non-existence. So the stakes are so high. Now, to the extent that the movements, the traditional established movements, cannot be mobilized. And again, I may be offending some on this call, I apologize in advance. The fact that we have put so much effort into the Kotel issue, at a time that this is important, I'm not belittling it. I'm not suggesting that it's not an important issue. But at a time when this did not help interface with Israelis and become strategically effective, because whereas Israelis in theory support egalitarian services, it's sort of at the bottom of the list. So we need to realize that we need to be strategic if we are to be successful. And if we can't get the movements to be strategic, then I believe, and Michael Chernick is here, and others from Ruach Hiddush are here, I believe that the fact that we have been able to bring together key rabbinic and hopefully more cantorial figures from all denominations, from all streams in Judaism, and the potential of rabbis as being social change agents is what should give us further energy and further commitment to, b'makom she'ein anashim yeh ish. If there is no leadership for this movement with a small m elsewhere, hopefully we'll be able to do better on providing leadership for that. So I think that the vision statement is a great sort of holistic, brief and concise, but bold and real and substantive approach. We'll be sending it to you. And for those who are lawyers, please join the legal effort of JPLAN, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network, you can write me. We'll provide link in the follow-up memo to everybody who was on this call or who registered. We urge you, if you're not a lawyer, but you know Jewish lawyers who care about those issues, invite them to join us. The legal action has potential, especially since so much is going to be waged in the courts of law, and because so much addresses core questions of basic rights, of democratic principles that lawyers, probably more than almost anybody else, are sensitive to and could help us convey outwardly to the Jewish community and specifically in support of our legal action in Israel in the courts. And I can tell you, we were in the Supreme Court just last week with a surprisingly positive reception by the panel of the Supreme Court judges, much better than we feared knowing the panel, regarding the right to civil burial. In a reality in which practically all the cemeteries in Israel are Orthodox. 26 years ago, the Knesset passed a law that provides for the right of everyone in Israel for an alternative civil burial. 26 years that law has not been implemented. And if you are surprised, how come? Well, the responsibility was vested in the hands of the Ministry of Religious Affairs. Now, the last agency that one would expect to be realizing the responsibility to provide Israelis with a pluralistic option for burial. The court was very receptive, and I think we have a good chance there. There are a number of legal pending cases that we carry out, that our friends and partners in Iraq are carrying out. Lawyers can be helpful to that. Okay, one more.
Just very quickly. So also lawyers in the United States, helping communities that you're part of, your synagogues, the Jewish organizations you're part of, to actually do programs on the threats to the rule of law and to the Supreme Court in Israel. It's vitally important right now. You speak with authority on that. You have allies who are experts in fields that relate to this, who can really talk with authority on these issues, and using the opportunity to help educate the American Jewish community about these threats and how urgent it is to address them, and how much their support for the protection of the democratic institutions of Israel is so vital, is another role that lawyers can play. And Uri, just you know that I generally agree with you about what the priorities have to be. Out of fairness to those who really focused on the Kotel, I don't know a single one of them that thought that if we won that battle hands down, one more person was going to get married by our rabbis, one more person would be buried in a cemetery, one more person would be converted. It was seen by many as a tool to create momentum, to help gird up for the broader battles that we all believe, every person on this call believes is the core to do it. Whatever the past about that, getting to the point now to protect and ensure that there's no further damage done on core areas for us, on all of the core areas, is a vital fight that we face right now, and we're all in that together.
Thank you. And certainly we'll send you more information about the threat to the Supreme Court and its authority. I didn't have more time to go into it, but just to sensitize you to that. The Speaker of the Knesset, the new Speaker of the Knesset, Yariv Levin, who is a close ally of Netanyahu and one of the key leaders of the Likud, saw fit in his maiden speech as Speaker of the Knesset to assault the Supreme Court. Mm-hmm. And this, the assault was basically mildly worded compared to things that he said in recent times. There is a real threat, and the fact that he chose to deal with it at the first speech he's making as the Speaker of the Knesset means this is going to occupy with this interesting partnership between the ultra-Orthodox parties on the one hand and some of the extreme right-wing politicians who look with dismay at some Supreme Court reviews, such as Yariv Levin himself. That partnership between them will ensure that this is going to be discussed intensively and frequently. And of course, the good news is, again, I'm going back to the silver lining, the good news is that Gantz and his group have been outspoken in the past as guardians of the rule of law, and hopefully they'll stand up to the pressure, because there'll be plenty of pressure. Rabbi Jordan Milstein, and we'll ask a couple more questions and then we'll quit. Please explain again how the coalition agreements are set up and how they could impact religious pluralism and the rights of non-Orthodox streams in Israel. Well, the coalition agreements are bilateral agreements between the party that's forming the coalition, and in this case, the Likud, and each of its individual political partners. They all have to be presented to the Knesset, and the coalition agreements can be setting up promises, commitments, and the question whether those promises and commitments will actually be carried out or not is a different question altogether, because it's already long been laid that these are political agreements, and therefore there is no way to really enforce those agreements as a legal instrument. On the other hand, they have tremendous political importance, because there's only so many times that you can, fool your partners, though Israeli political life has proven that certainly is not one or two times. But there is a limit to how much you can turn your back on your promises without paying some political penalties. So the coalition agreements indicate the commitment to attempt to bring about changes. This is the first time, because of the unique nature of this coalition and the parity and the fact that nothing can move forward without the agreement of both the Likud and Blue and White, means that Blue and White has a lot of blocking power. Now, will it use it or not? That's a different question. We related to it, but they have it. And therefore, the fact that the ultra-Orthodox got the Likud to commit to excessive expansion of both this override clause and what they call status quo, namely blocking every move forward, Blue and White may not be able to move forward. And on that, I'm less optimistic. But they will certainly be able to prevent some of the further erosion and some of the threats to the judiciary that are being contemplated. All right, one more question, and that is 1 minute. Just a second. There was another question here. Mention Richard Fulton. Mention has been made of the confluence of this activity with developments regarding the territories. Can these issues be dealt with on separate tracks so that whatever happens vis-a-vis the exercise of sovereignty, it does not derail movement towards a movement forward on parity? David, do you want to relate to, are these issues going to be derailing sort of progress on either, or on both these fronts, or can they be separated?
So 3 quick things. First, I don't know how many people know Rich Fulton. He is really one of the great advocates for religious freedom, for separation of church and state, for the kind of some of the issues we're talking about in the United States. And it's a pleasure to have him with us today. Secondly, you can separate them in terms of the political dynamics we're talking about. There are many people who would support some form of annexation who would be very sympathetic to our views on these issues here. So I really think these issues will be separated kinds of issues in terms of the political dynamics. I think everyone knows that, Gantz has taken a more hawkish position on these issues than the dovish figures in population in Israel, that segment of it would want. But on all these other issues, look at that party platform we talked about, and look what he said during the election. So they can be separated. What can't be separated, I don't think, here, but it goes beyond the purview of this call, is the impact it has on Israel diaspora relations, on alienating segments of the American or the global Jewish community. And this is not just an issue in America where it's more intense here, but I felt it in a number of the countries that I visited as well, particularly amongst the younger segments of the community who were very attracted by Jewish entities, New Israel Fund and other entities that had come over with a very explicit agenda here, and that was critical of Israel and the peace process, that was very attractive to people, and they were losing people, other organizations, to those voices. So it's true all across the globe. On those, Rich, I don't think you can separate them. It's all of a part of a vision of Israel that many in the diaspora community is having increasing difficulty in keeping a sharp focus on.
So I'll add a bit to that, and we'll really end. And to Rabbi Shalom Schechter, who asked about the Chametz ruling of the Supreme Court. You know what we are discussing. Subsequent programs will welcome suggestions from you as to what you would like to hear. But I think that we'll soon hold a program in which we'll deal specifically with some of the outstanding legal conflicts, and will certainly be referring to that landmark ruling of the Supreme Court regarding bringing Chametz into the hospitals on Pesach. There are some very interesting angles to that that are less known, such as there is really no halachic prohibition against it. But we'll keep the surprises for the session that will deal with it. So, but to David's point, and to conclude, Richard Fulton, we must be able to separate the two. Not because we want to, but because there is this saying in Israel, and you may have a parallel in America, bakvish, on the road, be wise, be smart, don't be right. If you are going to be doing only what's legally right and what's your right, you may be inviting an accident. The way to avoid accidents and move forward is to be smart. The reality is, as I explained at the beginning of this webinar, is that there is this opposite correlation. Namely, most Israelis politically are on the right because, to a great degree, they're in a different position than most Jews outside Israel. The issues of security, whether they are right or wrong about it, is a different issue, but the issues of security have an immediate impact on their lives, their livelihood, and their children. So they're on the right. But on religious pluralism and religious freedom issues, they are in support of free choice and of pluralism. So if we are going to insist on merging these two, we are not going to be able to create the wide alliances, because the battle, as I've shown in some of the surveys, the battle for religious freedom does not separate left from right. It is shared by a majority, small majority, but majority of the right, and the larger, much larger majority on the left, but it's still a majority both on the right and on the left. So to the extent that we want to be effective and make a difference, we need to understand that we can be active on both fronts. We can be both pushing, the J Street or Israel Policy Forum or whatever. And we can be pushing Hiddush and and Reform and Conservative and Reconstructionist and Renewal. But we need to be able to push them separately, because the minute we insist on, at the same time, with the same people, pushing them both, we are bound to be rebuffed. I'm sure that we can discuss it further, but we won't be able to do it at this time. Final word, David, yes.
Yeah, one last thing here. I want to come back to something I raised in my talk. That's what's going to happen in these ministries, where more moderate figures are going to control ministries that affect so many of the issues we're talking about. Funding for our streams, women's rights, here the surrogacy issues, there's a whole range of the issues, transportation, in which those are going to be controlled by ministries that are not going to have a minister appointed by Likud, but by blue and white, or by labor, as the case may be. A lot of the economic ministries, etc. It is really important that we gear up to make those fights more effectively than ever. And a lot of the ability to protect what they do may end up in the courts as well. And so what Hiddush and Iraq and others do in the courts to protect what we've gained so far from being reversed, or what we can achieve, not through legislation, but through ministry action, will become crucially important. But it can make a huge difference on the ground in Israel in ways that would be very important.
Thank you, David. Thank you, everybody here from Jerusalem. And most of you are on the US side, and maybe some from outside the US, US and Canada, and maybe some outside North America. It's been wonderful to be sharing this webinar together. I know some of you may be frustrated because you haven't spoken. We'll look for an opportunity to hold a webinar in which the mic is going to be open and shared by those of you who participate in a bigger way. Donald Burris, yes, we'll call you. Thank you for offering to be involved in the legal effort. Lawyers, write to me and we'll send you the link and the invitation. Let's keep the faith. There is certainly, the title was, is it a death blow to pluralism, or is there an opportunity hidden in it? I believe there is a silver lining. I believe we are far better off than we might have been had it been a narrower coalition that was fully dependent on the ultra-Orthodox. We should utilize this opportunity, create an opening, and that opening will grow, and it'll grow not only because it's the right opening, but because so many Israelis too are supporting it.
And one last thing, Uri Regev is a treasure. Hiddush is indispensable. Do what you can to be supportive. Thank you, Uri.
Thank you, David. Thank you all, and shalom for now.